We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
This last week marked the anniversary of D-Day, where boats landed in Normandy to begin the final pushback against Adolf Hitler. And since then, it's fair to say that relations between France and the United States have been somewhat strained. Well, to expand on this not-so-special relationship, we're joined by our resident expert in all things defense, Mr. Dave Patterson. Bonjour, Dave.
Bonjour, Mark.
Should we do this whole thing in French?
we Americans have issued French for a very long time.
All right. So, Dave, our listeners are no doubt aware that I personally I'm from England, and my country has a roughly 1,000-year history of fighting the French in one battle or this war or another war. But how does the French-American relationship stand right now?
Well, I think it's been an off again, on again relationship. I mean, during the French and Indian War, we were somewhat miffed by their taking up with the Indians. But on the other hand, during the Revolutionary War, the French came to our aid. And so it's been.
You do realize that they only did that to annoy the English.
I know that. I know that. But then, the Germans came on board, the Hessians came on board to annoy us. So I think it's all kind of come out in the wash during the late 1700s. But at the same time, the French have had their problems with their revolution. And so that kind of took their time. And of course, then there was the number of wars during the 1800s in Europe that the United States thoughtfully did not get into. But I think that where most recently things have gone awry started after World War II, although the French people have been extraordinarily gracious after World War II, D-Day's invasion and the liberation of France. But the French government has been somewhat less cordial. And I think that a lot of it has to do with Charles de Gaulle, quite frankly, and I mean he although he had a rather major part to play in the liberation of Paris, without much effort on his part, I might add, but nonetheless, after World War II was over, Charles de Gaulle wanted to reassert the prominence of France. Without much in the way of substance to do that. He thought that perhaps his role in NATO would bring more prominence, but when that showed not to be true, and the United States and Great Britain levied the rules and regulations for the use of nuclear weapons on France. In other words, neither the United States nor UK nor France would be able to use any nuclear weapons without agreement by all three, and that did not set well with de Gaulle.
Well, I think it's interesting that you talk about de Gaulle, because Macron really sees himself as the next de Gaulle, I think.
I'd say of all of the French personalities that he might want to model himself out, de Gaulle may not be the one I would certainly choose.
No, I mean in terms of the grandeur of his position. I mean, this is the guy who said that he would rule in a Jupiterian manner, sitting on high and casting out his orders. And I think UK relationship has gone downhill in recent years with President Macron, because he's been pushing to bolster support for the European Union rather than for, as reflected in the recent election, which he did win, but there was such a nationalistic uprising against him that it was a very close run thing for a while there. But now, in his words, when Britain left the EU, he's been seeking to, and these are his words, punish the UK for leaving. Now, is it perhaps this attitude that makes France really much a social outcast in terms of international politics? Or is it because France is within the EU so heavily that it's ceded its own authority?
Well, first of all, I think that the comment was a bit cheeky, but nonetheless, I think that it kind of represents the way France sees themselves in the world. And we've experienced that, obviously, in 1986 when Great Britain graciously allowed us to fly our F-111s out of airfields in British airfields and to bomb Libya. You'll
Bryce
recall
Norton, I believe. Bryce Norton Air Base.
Bryce Norton, Lakenheath,
Yeah.
yes. And
Terrible accommodation there, by the way. Just terrible.
I'll take your. Well, actually, I have had accommodation there, and I
didn't like it.
Oh,
Sorry,
did you have a
please.
Batman? Huh?
No.
Oh, there you go.
I barely had a Robin.
But I think that kind of put a wedge between France and the United States when they did not allow the F-111s to fly over France in the bombing raid, and caused us to go around them with a number of additional air refuelings. And then in 9/11, when the French didn't participate in the coalition against Iraq, I think that was not helpful to the relationship. But as a good friend, Jed Babin, who was a writer for the Washington Times, said, frankly, going to war without France is like going to war or going to deer hunting without an accordion. You just leave a lot of noisy baggage behind.
Yeah, that's become quite a famous one. There's also, Ed, I recall growing up hearing about the freedom fries that were readily available in fast food establishments.
We did. We'll get them. We're quite good at punishing our detractors.
Now,
I think most recently, though, Mark, we have to say that the submarine deal with Australia has really set them off. But they had to realize, the 2016 deal between France and Australia for a $39 billion deal, I might add, with France for diesel submarines. And the way I characterize it is that France sold submarines. The Trump administration negotiated with Australia to establish nuclear submarine capability in the Indo-Pacific region. So there was a bit of a difference in motivation between, I think, France and the UK and US in its relationship with Australia. Also, it brings Australia really into the nuclear submarine community and gives them a much greater capability than the diesel submarines would have.
Well, Dave, I'd like to leave you with a little anecdote that I heard. Now, it's certainly not true, but I think it speaks to the issue. And it goes, there was an elderly gentleman recently going through customs in France, and he didn't have his passport with him. And the French clerk, the border clerk there, said, "Well, you're not part of the EU. Don't you know that you need a passport to enter France?" And the old man said, "Well, the last time I came through here, I landed in Normandy, and there wasn't a Frenchman in sight." Dave Patterson, thank you ever so much.
Hey, Mark, great to be with you. Au revoir.
Au revoir. You're listening to Liberty Nation Radio, heard across the Radio America network from our flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC in Washington, D.C. I'd like to extend a special thank you to our listeners in Brownwood, Texas, on KXYL 1240 AM and 102.3 FM. Thanks for being here. Coming up later in the show, we talk George Soros's expensive district attorneys. But up next, is Joe Biden trying to pull off a Wizard of Oz-style deceit? We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
We're doing it for real, really real. Liberty Nation.
And Jeff Charles, contributor for LibertyNation.com.
I think we're starting to make an impact. Liberty style, fight for freedom.
The tracking poll sponsored by Liberty Nation for Thursday.
Mentioned by Dan Bongino, Rasmussen, Jordan Peterson, and
I can
others.
do it again if you want me to.
Cited in Mark Levin's American Marxism.
I think we're starting to make a really big impact. Get noticed. We're doing it. Rock on. I'm gone.